Health officials are urging parents to look out for symptoms of Strep A after 6 children died with an invasive form of the bacterial infection. Strep A infections are usually mild, causing illness ranging from a sore throat to scarlet fever. Experts say there are more Strep A cases than usual this year. Professor Beate Kampmann said parents should seek medical help if they were worried. No deaths have been confirmed in Scotland or Northern Ireland. The UK Health Security Agency said the last time there was an intensive period of Strep A infection was in 2017-18, when there were 4 deaths in England in the equivalent time frame. The rise in Strep A cases and deaths is most likely due to high amounts of the bacteria circulating and increased social mixing, the UKHSA said. Speaking to BBC Radio 4's Today programme on Saturday, infectious diseases pediatrician Professor Kampmann said Strep A caused an asymptomatic infection in the majority of people, then there is a sore throat, then scarlet fever, and in a very, very small minority will there be invasive group A strep. The rash starts in the elbows and behind the neck. It tends to then peel after about 10 days because the disease is caused by a toxin that is produced by this bacterium. Professor Kampmann said if children became really unwell, or if parents were in doubt, they should seek help. She also said children with a fever should be kept off school. She continued, "The good news is that Group A strep is very, very treatable with penicillin." But she added, if your child is deteriorating in any way, you feel that they're not eating, drinking, being quite flat and lethargic, you need to take them to the doctors and to get them checked out. The latest data shows there were 851 cases of scarlet fever reported in the week of the 14th to the 20th of November, compared to an average of 186 for the preceding years. Virologist Dr. Chris Smith said the general rise in Strep A infections could be due to a drop in immunity following the pandemic. He told BBC Breakfast, "There's something about the vulnerability of the population and particularly younger people. What has changed is that younger people have been through 3 years, almost, of relative isolation from each other. They haven't caught the normal infections at the normal rates and at the normal times that normal children of that sort of age bracket would have done. So, we wonder whether it is that we are seeing a big rash of cases all at once." There have been 2.3 cases of the invasive Strep A disease per 100,000 children aged 1 to 4 in England this year, compared with an average of 0.5 in pre-pandemic seasons of 2017 to 19, the UKHSA said. There have also been 1.1 cases per 100,000 children aged 5 to 9, compared with a pre-pandemic average over the same period of 0.3. It is known as invasive gas and needs urgent treatment as this can be serious and life-threatening.
What we know about Georgia voters ahead of Senate runoff. For the past 2 years, the eyes of the political world keep turning back to Georgia. And for the second time in 2 years, voters in this key state will choose their senator in a runoff election, which this time will determine whether Democrats expand on their 50-50 majority. Early data shows voters are not tired of their civic duty. Heading into Tuesday's Senate runoff between Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker, nearly 1.5 million Georgians have voted early after only about a week. Black voters have made up nearly a third of the early electorate so far, while more than a quarter of voters so far are under 50. Early voting for the runoff ended on Friday. Georgians had only 5 mandatory days of early voting this year, compared with 3 weeks during the last runoff and for last month's general election. All but 22 counties chose not to allow early voting last Saturday and Sunday as well. Overall, 2022 midterm turnout was slightly up from the 2018 midterms, but down more than 21% from the 2020 general election. While midterm voters typically skew older and whiter, turnout data from the Georgia Secretary of State's office shows that in 2022, midterm voters in Georgia were older and whiter than they have been in the past 4 elections, including the 2018 midterms. Those voters tend to lean Republican. The fact that Warnock not only forced a runoff but also narrowly led Walker in the first round of voting last month suggests he had the support of independent and some Republican voters, political scientists told CNN. The key to Warnock was that according to the exit polls, he won the independent vote by a pretty big margin, said Alan Abramovitz, a political scientist at Emory University in Atlanta. And that was enough to pull him through. In the runoff, I think he'll need to do that as well. CNN exit polls of Georgia voters in the November election show that the share of independent voters shrank 4 percentage points compared with 2020. However, independent voters were 24% of the electorate, which Warnock won by 11 points, according to CNN exit polls. Overall, 2022 midterm voters were older and whiter. A slightly larger share of white voters and smaller shares of Black, Asian, and Latino voters cast their ballots in 2022 compared with Georgia's previous 3 midterm elections and runoffs. The share of Black voters was the lowest of any Georgia election since the 2018 midterms. A CNN exit poll from 2021 showed that Warnock won 93% of Black voters in Georgia's last runoff election, a 6-point improvement from the general election held in November 2020. Black voters' share of Georgia's electorate increased in the 2021 runoff election when Warnock faced Senator Kelly Loeffler after neither took a majority of the vote in the 2020 general election. Black voters made up 28% of the Georgia electorate in that runoff, slightly higher than their share in the 2020 general election. Black voter turnout was highest when Stacey Abrams, a Democrat, first ran against NowGov Brian Kemp, a Republican, for governor in 2018. Voters in the 2022 midterms were also older. Georgians over 50 represented 59% of the electorate this year, a new high since 2018. The share of voters under 30, meanwhile, shrank to 11%, its lowest point since 2018. Exit polls show Warnock was able this year to sustain the improvements he made in the 2021 runoff election with the youngest voters and those in urban areas. He also won the support of 67% of urban voters in the 2021 runoff, 4 points more than Democrats' share in 2020. Warnock won 69% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 68% of urban voters in last month's general election. Last month's election was unusual in that more than 17,000 Georgians skipped the Senate race at the top of the ballot but did vote for governor. We aren't entirely sure, but it is highly likely that those voters are probably Republicans, said Amy Steigerwalt, a political science professor at Georgia State University. There were also Kemp voters this year who crossed the aisle to vote for Warnock and then voted for the rest of the Republican ticket, Steigerwalt said. Kemp received 2.1 million votes, roughly 200,000 more than Walker. The big question for this runoff is how Walker does when he runs on his own and without a chance of Republicans regaining control of the Senate, Abramovitz told CNN.
Pentagon unveils first strategic bomber in over 30 years to counter China. The Pentagon unveiled its first new strategic bomber in more than 30 years on Friday, a nuclear-capable bat-wing plane that will become a central component of the U.S. effort to counter China's military buildup when it enters service around 2027. Almost every aspect of the B-21 Raider is classified, but in a tightly controlled unveiling at the Air Force's Plant 42 in Palmdale, California, currently home of Lockheed Martin's legendary Skunk Works, the new strategic plane was briefly shown to the public. "This isn't just another airplane," Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said. 50 years of advances in low observable technology have gone into this aircraft. Even the most sophisticated air defense systems will struggle to detect a B-21 in the sky. The ceremony started with a flyover of the 3 bombers still in service. The 70-year-old B-52 Stratofortress, the 49-year-old B-1 Lancer and the 33-year-old B-2 Spirit, a strategic plane of which only 20 were ever built. The B-21, manufactured by Northrop Grumman, looks much like B-2, acknowledged the contractor's CEO Kathy Warden. The way it operates internally is extremely advanced compared to the B-2, because the technology has evolved so much in terms of the computing capability that we can now embed in the software of the B-21, Warden said. Included in information offered to the public was the plane's estimated cost, engine manufacturer and payload. Top speed, ceiling, range were all listed as classified, though the Pentagon allowed that it will be optionally crewed, and it wants 100 of them. In its annual China report published this week, the Pentagon said China is on track to have 1,500 nuclear weapons by 2035. Including hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare, and space capabilities, the report said that China represents the most consequential and systemic challenge to U.S. national security and the free and open international system. 6 Raiders are in production, and it was shown to the public because it will soon start ground testing in open view. The first flight is planned for next year. But some warn that estimates of cost depend on how many the Pentagon purchases and if testing runs smoothly. It's easy to say that the B-21 is still on schedule before it actually flies, Dan Grazier, a senior defense policy fellow at the Project on Government Oversight, told Reuters. It's only when one of these programs goes into the actual testing phase when real problems are discovered. The Raider's larger predecessor, the B-2, was anticipated to be a fleet of 132 aircraft when it was unveiled in 1988. But the collapse of the Soviet Union, combined with cost overruns, reduced the anticipated order 5-fold. That left each plane costing $2.2 billion in 2022 dollars. The B-2 was also limited because its windows didn't open and it had to be housed in large, air-conditioned hangars to stop its cockpit electrics from frying. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Pentagon began allowing Northrop Grumman employees to acknowledge to their families and friends that they worked on the B-21. Northrop Grumman said 400 suppliers are involved in the project and the plane had been designed with existing parts and technology. The B-21 is designed to be a daily flyer, Tom Jones, head of the company's aerospace unit, told the outlet.